People go out to a nightclub to have fun, to dance the night away to the thumping music, to have some drinks and just cut loose with friends. Nightclubs become regular meeting places where groups socialize and decompress after work and to celebrate. Many of these places become a community where people feel safe opening up and being themselves. That is, until they get burned by a monster. Phil and Steve had followed many paths leading up to 1970. He joined the seminary and then joined the Navy, but neither were the right fit for him. In 1970, his mother passed away and he inherited $15,000. He knew that this was a chance to finally find his place in the world and became interested in opening a business. When he asked a friend if he should open a gift shop, she said, well, if someone had $1, they'll buy a drink before they buy a gift. Phil knew then that he was going to open a bar. Specifically a gay nightclub. At 604 Iberville sat a 3-story brick building. As with all buildings like this, the first floor was set up for commercial use, with a bar occupying that space. Normally, the second and third floors would be designated as living areas, but the second floor was also set up as a bar and the third floor consisted of storage and a flop house with a couple of rooms for rent. The second floor bar had been closed for about a year and the owner was asking for $15,000, but Phil didn't want to spend all of his money, so he offered her $7,500 and she accepted. Phil had no knowledge of nightclub operations, so he spent some time going to other area nightclubs searching for tips. He started talking to the bartender, Buddy Rasmussen. Buddy advised him that the first thing he needed was a bartender he could trust. It's said that Phil hired Buddy on the spot. The first problem they ran into was the stairway up to the second floor bar. It was about 4 feet wide and had plumbing pipes running along the wall. Basically, it was ugly. To dress things up, they hung colorful fabric over the pipes and added carpeting to the stairs to make the entry look more inviting. The interior was split into 3 large rooms. The first room had the most windows, 4 on one wall and 3 on the other. It's also where the bar was located. Through a wide arched doorway, the second room was set up with tables and a dance floor. At the end of this room was a fire-rated door that led into the third room, which was dark because its windows had all been painted over. This room was turned into a theater where patrons would end up putting on plays. Phil and Buddy felt like there were too many windows and it ruined the privacy, so they walled over 3 of the windows in the second room and the 2 windows behind the bar. They added louvered shutters to the bottom half of the rest of the windows. They kept most of the existing decor, which consisted of red carpet and red flocked wallpaper. They added matching fabric around the ceiling and walls. They built a small stage in the first room and put a baby grand piano on it. And no gay bar at the time would be complete without a couple of beefcake posters. One of a nude Burt Reynolds and one of Mark Spitz wearing nothing but a tiny swimsuit and 7 Olympic gold medals. The UpStairs Lounge opened its doors on Halloween of 1970 and quickly collected a loyal group of regulars. This was helped out by the implementation of a weekly beer bust. From 5 to 7 p.m. each Sunday, $1 would get you all the beer you could drink. When they added a musician called Piano Dave, the turnout was even bigger. The bar began holding outrageous events like costume parties and tricycle races. Buddy had a microphone at the bar and he began announcing each regular customer when they walked in the door. People said that Buddy had an uncanny ability to make people feel special, and his main goal was for people who came to the UpStairs Lounge to feel like they were at home, that they were accepted. Reverend Troy Perry was raised in a Protestant evangelical family, and it wasn't until he had married a woman and became a minister that he realized his sexuality. After losing his wife and his ministry, he attempted suicide after a failed relationship with a man. After reflecting on these events, he came to the realization that it was possible for homosexuals to live spiritual lives. He started the Metropolitan Community Church in 1968 in Los Angeles as a Christian church that accepted homosexuals into their faith. The church quickly grew to have branches in New York, Atlanta, and soon New Orleans. The pastor of the New Orleans congregation, Reverend Bill Larson, needed a place to hold services, so he asked Phil and Steve if he could use the UpStairs Lounge. They set up in the third room and began holding services on Sunday mornings. When the service was over, many of the church members would stick around for a drink, which would eventually lead to the beer bust. Some of the members weren't thrilled about the idea of going to church in a bar, so after a few months, Reverend Bill found a new place to hold his sermons. The connection to the church would remain with the UpStairs lounge, though, as church members became regulars and would faithfully show up at the bar after Sunday service each week. It was a place where people could come together and be themselves. On June 28, 1973, it was a hot summer day in New Orleans. High temperatures and high humidity made most people not want to leave their houses. Buddy didn't have that luxury, though, this Sunday. He had to be at the UpStairs lounge by noon to make sure the establishment was ready for a 2 p.m. opening. That day was expected to be busier than usual because it was the final day of Pride weekend, which was the last weekend in June and meant to commemorate the Stonewall riots. On June 28, 1969, New York police raided a gay bar in Greenwich Village called the Stonewall Inn. They were arresting people simply for being gay, which wasn't a new event in the country in the 1960s. But this time, the patrons of the bar decided to fight back. Before long, the police had locked themselves inside the bar for their own safety, and protests in the area lasted for days. This event was a defining moment in the fight for gay rights, which is now a fight for the entire LGBTQ+ community. By the afternoon, the UpStairs lounge was filled with regulars and MCC members ready for a Sunday evening of drinking and festivities. Piano Dave took his place at the Baby Grand and took requests. He had been making his living playing at various bars in the city, and tonight he was playing at the UpStairs lounge during the beer bust, but at 7 p.m., he turned the piano over to another pianist who was going to play the rest of the evening to raise money for the MCC. During the course of the evening, a man began harassing other patrons as they went to use the restroom. There were 2 stalls, and the man would stand in one and make sexual comments at the people using the other stall. Now, Phil and Buddy did not want their bar to be a sleazy pickup location. They didn't tolerate untoward sexual behavior or drug use in their establishment. The man in the bathroom wouldn't be considered a regular to the bar, but he was known to the other patrons, and he wasn't someone other people enjoyed having around. Eventually, bar regular Michael Scarborough had had enough of his behavior and reported the situation to Buddy. The man was told to get out of the restroom, but he immediately began harassing Michael at his table. Michael stood up and punched the man in the face, knocking him to the floor. The man was escorted out of the bar. After that, another young man caused a stir by stealing people's beer mugs. Between 5 and 7 p.m., bottomless pitchers of beer were $1, but in order to drink it, you had to pay 50 cents for a mug, which you would get back when you returned the mug at the end of the night. A young man was taking other people's mugs and turning them in, collecting the money. When Buddy saw what he was doing, he ordered him to leave. The man mumbled that he would be back, and on his way out, he grabbed 2 mugs which he smashed at the bottom of the stairs. At 7:53 p.m., a woman who lived across the street left to get cigarettes and thought she heard someone yell something about a fire, so she poked her head into the door to the UpStairs lounge and saw a small fire at the bottom of the stairs. The fire was only on the first 2 steps when the woman saw it, but it was quickly moving up the stairway. The carpeting on the stairs was extremely flammable, as were the clothes that were draped over the exposed pipes. Fire raced up the stairs and turned into a raging inferno at the landing on top. At the bottom of the stairs, there was a buzzer installed so that Phil or Buddy could be notified of deliveries before the bar was open, or that a taxi had arrived for an intoxicated patron. Despite no deliveries being scheduled and nobody having called a taxi, the buzzer continued to ring. Buzz, 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 buzz. Over and over, the buzzer kept ringing, and Buddy was sure that someone was outside playing with the button. He was busy at the bar, so he asked one of his regulars, Luther Boggs, to go out and tell whoever was playing with the buzzer to knock it off. As soon as Luther pulled the door open, a column of fire blasted into the bar, blowing Luther back and setting his clothes on fire. The door was supposed to be fire-rated and close on its own, but it didn't work properly, so all of the heat and fire from the stairs came shooting into the bar, quickly igniting everything on fire. This was before codes that required materials to be fire-resistant, so the carpet, the wallpaper, the curtains, and the fabric draped around the bar were all flammable, and the fire overtook the entire place. There was a fire escape out one of the windows, and someone broke the glass to get outside. Once there, he realized that the fire escape didn't go down to the street. It only connected the second and third floors. People were gathering outside, and they began yelling at him to jump. His clothes were on fire, and he realized it was his only way to get to safety, so he took the plunge, and after he hit the ground, a man from a nearby bar poured a pitcher of ice water over him and put out the flames. Unfortunately, the window to the so-called fire escape was right next to the entrance, so it was blocked by flames coming in through the door. A few more people made it outside, and one was Luther Boggs, who was completely engulfed in flames. He jumped and was quickly extinguished with a pitcher of water, but a woman couldn't bring herself to jump over the rail, so she went up to the third floor and was able to wait there until she was rescued. Luther would be taken to the hospital, where he died 16 days later. There was another way out of the building, but it wasn't well known. Buddy, who had worked in fire protection while in the Air Force, knew about the other exit and walked along the bar, tapping each patron and telling them to follow him. Despite some patrons remaining frozen where they were, Buddy led about 20 people through the middle room and into the theater, where there was a door behind the stage that led out onto the roof of the neighboring building. When they reached the roof, Dwayne Mitchell, who went by Mitch, realized that his partner, Horace Broussard, wasn't with them. Mitch ran back into the building to find Horace. Their remains would later be found inside the bar, holding each other. Once on the roof, Buddy and the group went in the window of an apartment and made their way outside. Other people squeezed out of the windows and jumped onto the street. The windows on the front of the building were about 9 feet tall, and they went all the way to the floor. In order to ensure people didn't fall out the window while they were drinking and dancing, the previous tenant had installed bars across the windows. Many people managed to squeeze underneath the bottom bar, but Pastor Bill Larson was struggling. After getting his head and one arm out of the window, he got stuck and the flames overtook his body. All of this chaos happened within a matter of minutes. The first fire truck arrived just 2 minutes after they were called. By 8 o'clock, there were 4 fire trucks on scene battling the blaze. The fire was fully extinguished by 8:12, just 16 minutes after the emergency call was made. In that 16 minutes, 28 people died inside the upstairs lounge. 1 person died en route to the hospital, and 3 more died from their wounds on the days after the fire. There were also 15 injuries. The death toll was 32, and it's the deadliest fire in New Orleans history. Until the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2016, it was the deadliest attack on a gay club in the U.S. Despite the toll this fire took on the citizens of New Orleans, the media and the local leaders showed little interest in the event. Police initially shrugged off the incident, saying it was a bar frequented by burglars, thieves, and queers. New Orleans Mayor Moon Landrieu refused to even make a statement about the tragedy, which many saw as being due to the sexual orientation of the victims. On November 29, 1972, just 7 months prior, the top floors of the 17-story Ralt Center were set on fire by an arsonist and 6 people died. Afterward, the mayor, along with Governor Edwin Edwards, made many public statements and even declared it a day of mourning. Then the upstairs lounge fire happened, killing 32 people, the deadliest fire in New Orleans history, and those same people were silent. To make matters worse for the survivors, many of them had to go to work and pretend they didn't know or didn't care about the tragedy. Many of them couldn't come out at work for fear of ridicule or even losing their job. A coworker would ask them what they thought of the fire, and they had to lie, even pretend to not know about it. Some had to listen to jokes like, "What are they going to bury the bodies in? Fruit jars?" and pretend to not be outraged and offended. Not only were the deaths of their friends and family ignored by the city, but they were actively mocked right in front of them. It wasn't only the leaders who refused to acknowledge the tragedy. Many of the people who frequented the upstairs lounge were not out of the closet. When news of the fire broke, many people's families were finding out about their sexual orientation for the first time. Pastor Bill Larson's mother was so horrified to find out that her son was a gay pastor for a gay church that she refused to claim his body. She ultimately released his body to the Metropolitan Community Church. 2 of the bodies have never been identified. Their bodies were burned beyond recognition, and the fact that they perished at a gay club may have contributed to the family members not coming forward. When a memorial service was planned, they knew that they didn't have enough room at the house where the MCC services were held. After asking many other churches if they could use their buildings and being denied, Father Bill Richardson of the St. George Episcopal Church agreed to hold the memorial there. He knew Bill Larson and believed allowing space for these victims was an important thing to do. The next day, Father Richardson was contacted by the Episcopal Bishop of Louisiana, expressing his unhappiness that he allowed a memorial service for gay people in the church. The bishop claimed that he received more than 100 complaints calling for his resignation. Father Richardson wrote a statement where he simply asked, quote, "Would Jesus have barred these grief-stricken people from his church, or would he have welcomed them?" He told his members that, if they believed that the church should only minister to a select few and not the whole community, he would consider resigning. Needless to say, he didn't resign. It didn't stop the bishop from instructing his clergy not to allow any funeral services to the victims and to deny them burial in any Catholic cemetery. Authorities initially claimed that they didn't believe the fire was arson. While firefighters were still on the scene, Buddy saw the man that had been kicked out earlier for harassing Michael Scarborough, a man who would later be identified as Roger Nunez, and dragged him to a police officer. He tried to have the officer hold Roger for questioning, but the officer just told Buddy to let the man go. As soon as Buddy released his grip on Roger's arm, he disappeared. Troy Perry insisted the fire was arson, as it would have been the third in a string of fires to be set to MCC locations. That January, someone set fire to the MCC Mother Church in Los Angeles, and earlier in June, the Nashville church was set ablaze. Nobody was injured in those other fires. There were 3 investigations into the fire. One was by the New Orleans Police Department, one was by the Fire Prevention Division of the New Orleans Fire Department, and the third was by the Arson Investigation Unit of the Louisiana State Fire Marshal. The Fire Prevention Division only really looked at how the fire started and how it progressed. This was to determine what could have been done physically to prevent the fire. These types of investigations are what give us new codes to ensure public and even private spaces are at least safer from fire. Their investigation documented an empty can of lighter fluid at the bottom of the stairs going up to the bar, which was also the point of origin for the fire. The police investigators interviewed most of the survivors, and the common story they kept hearing was about the fight between Roger Nunez and Michael Scarborough. When Michael was interviewed, he added that Roger threatened to burn down the bar as he was forced to leave. Investigators quickly found the young man that had been kicked out of the bar for turning in other people's mugs, and he was eliminated. After 8 days of interviews and searching, they finally tracked down Roger Nunez, who was acting strange, and they thought he was drunk. It turned out that he had recently had a seizure, so the detectives took him to the hospital, where it was also discovered he had a broken jaw, most likely from the punch from Michael. Roger needed surgery on his jaw, which would make him unable to speak for several days. The investigators told the hospital not to release him without notifying them first. Days later, when they returned to the hospital, they found out that Roger had been released, of course. After a few days of searching for Roger, the New Orleans police investigators gave up, and the police investigation into an arson at the UpStairs lounge was over. The investigation by the fire marshal was not, however. They had also learned of Roger Nunez's activities the day of the fire and were actively seeking him out. The fire marshal investigators tracked him down to his hometown of Abbeville and interviewed him in September, where he denied any involvement in the fire. They were never able to prove his guilt, but they tried much harder than the New Orleans police did. In the months that followed, Roger ended up marrying a woman who many believe he felt might cure him of his homosexuality. People who knew him said that he struggled with his sexual orientation his whole life, and his wife would later say in an interview with the fire investigators that they'd never consummated their marriage. Roger had brain surgery to remove a tumor in 1974 and died of suicide on November 15th of the same year. The fire marshal continued to try to find answers for the UpStairs lounge fire for 16 more years, finally closing the case in 1980. Enjoy your time on Earth, be yourself, and treat each other with respect. Don't let your own personal problems tear other people's communities apart. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases in criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.